Apologies for the length. I tried to cut it down some, but it is simply just a long story. I hope this is vague enough to remain anonymous, but those involved are still out there somewhere, and I'd really prefer not to encounter them again. However, I will say, this happened in the USA. For reference, I'm female. I was 20 years old at the time, living in an apartment with my mom and little brother while I attended community college. When we first moved in, the apartments were very well run, but within a short time, the manager was transferred elsewhere, and his replacement did not have his skill at keeping undesirable types out. The police were a regular sight in our neighborhood, and a rare day would go by without seeing them. The woman who moved in downstairs from us began openly dealing drugs. People would come and go at all hours, and leaving stuff in little bags of various substances in their pockets. Mostly weed, but definitely other stuff as well. They could have not been more obvious if they tried, and there was always a crowd of shady-looking men with large, unfriendly dogs hanging around the yard, or even on our stairs. They'd act like it was a personal insult if we interrupted them by walking up and down our stairs. They would be genuinely upset and quite intimidating. The breaking point didn't come until their customers started getting the wrong address and coming to our door instead. We'd be there sitting in our living room and hear footsteps come up to the stairs, and the doorknob would turn and jiggle against the lock. We became religious about keeping the door locked really tight at that point. One night, I was home alone and someone started just beating on the door, not just knocking. It was more like he thought it was a punching bag, all while screaming barely comprehensible obscenities. I grabbed the biggest butcher knife out the kitchen and shouted through the door that I was calling 911, and he ran away. In hindsight, I probably should have actually called them, but I was just relieved that he ran away. And since I haven't seen what he looked like at all, I figured it wouldn't be much use anyway. After that though, I always pushed the couch in front of the door before I went to bed. Mom had enough. She tried going to the manager at first, and was met with a total lack of interest from her. So we decided there was nothing that could be done but contact the police about it herself. So she called about it, and got off the phone looking happy, because they at least seemed to take her seriously and promised to do an investigation. The first sight of trouble came the next night. There was a lot of thumping and bumping downstairs, and a peep out the window showed that people were going in and out of the apartment, carrying cardboard boxes into a dented van on the street. Brightly and early the next morning, the police raided the place, and you guessed it, clean as a whistle. At first, we didn't realize the implications of this. When it started back up a few days later, Mom called the cops again, and the same thing happened. At that point, we realized it wasn't probably a coincidence. Somebody in the local police department was most likely tipping them off, one of the curses of living in a small town. I was angry and disappointed, but at least we tried, right? It never hurt to try. I wish. About a week later, I was getting ready for an evening class. I'd just gotten out the shower, and I was in my bedroom in a bathrobe, picking out what I wanted to wear. I heard a loud banging on the front door, but didn't think much of it. We'd been expecting the package from the UPS man, and he always knocked really loudly for some reason. My mom's footsteps went to answer it, and I hear her say something. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone caught my attention, and I felt something was wrong. I reached for my door, but before I could open it, it flew in my face. All my shocked brain could grasp was, there was a huge man with a gun in my bedroom, before I was grabbed by the shoulders and flung to the floor. I honestly thought the druggies downstairs had come to get us once and for all. I thought I was about to be raped or murdered. At this point, I should mention, I had an issue with one of my wrists due to a childhood injury. I'd had it operated on twice, and this was not more than a few months after the second operation. Naturally, I managed to land full weight on that wrist, and something crunched horribly. And I did what I thought a tough person would do, and immediately bursted out into tears and sat there clutching my wrist, waiting to die. I guess I must have not looked very threatening like that, because he stepped back a bit, and that's when I saw police on the front of his vest. The next few minutes were a bit of a blur. Somehow, I was herded into my living room, where my mom was, and the cop left without saying any more than, "Wait here." I was completely dazed. My mom was pretty much having hysterics, and there was all kinds of shouting and activity going on outside. After a short while, the cop returned and informed us, to paraphrase, "Sorry, wrong address. Shit happens. We can't be perfect all the time. My name is Officer Shinken. Here's my card. You can call me if you have any questions." And then, just like that, he left. I went straight to the emergency room and spent the next 2 hours getting my wrist x-rayed and then put into a splint. and then I went to math class because I didn't know what else to do, and I was terrified of being at home. Needless to say, I learned nothing whatsoever, but the support of my teacher and classmates was reassuring. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. When my mom answered, it was Officer Shinkin again. I heard his voice and started hyperventilating and went to hide in the bathroom. I didn't hear what was said, but I heard my mom slamming the door. She was absolutely furious. I never seen her look so angry. Apparently, good old Officer Shrinkin had brought along a carefully prepared document he wished for us to sign that basically said we understood it was all just a terrible mistake and that we would not be seeking legal action. She told him to go to hell and shut the door on his face. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was one of the nurses at the emergency room saying someone claiming to be law enforcement had just came by, trying to get copies of my ER visit records, but they didn't have permission to release those, and if I wanted to give it to them, I had to come in and sign the forms. Oh hell no. Further questions revealed that yes, the man matched Officer Shrikin's description, and furthermore, he told the nurse that he was not the officer involved, but was investigating the incident. I started to find that pretty much everyone that I told the story to would get a funny look on their face and say, "This cop, was his name Officer Shrinkin?" And then they would launch into their own horror story about him. My high school teacher said that he shot one of her former students during a marijuana bust that left him on the ground and bleeding to death, but the other officer on the scene did first aid and saved his life. One of her neighbors said that he dragged said neighbor's disabled uncle down a flight of stairs by his feet, hitting his head on every concrete step. Another neighbor said that Officer Shrinkin pulled him out of the shower by his hair and held a gun to his head over a parole violation. And Google said that he had once been fired from a nearby city for shooting a handcuffed man in the head, killing him. He claimed that it was somehow self-defense, and he was fired, but never charged with any crime. The medical bills for the ER visit and such ended up being over $7 grand, and I didn't have insurance at the time, so I basically had no choice but to file a suit. I found myself a lawyer and submitted a claim, and that's when shit really started to hit the fan. We started getting disturbing phone calls at all hours of the night, sometimes just silence on the other end, the sound of somebody breathing, and sometimes graphically sexual comments. When we stopped answering the phone, they just let it ring and the machine picked up, then immediately hang up and do it again. My mom went to her car one morning and opened the door, only to discover that the handle had been coated in some kind of chemical. She washed it off quickly, but still ended up with burns and an emergency room visit. I had just gotten my permit and was out for driving practice when it began to rain as I went down the highway. I flipped on the windshield wipers and discovered they'd been coated with grimy motor oil. It smeared across the windshield and completely obscured my vision. Fortunately, the road was empty enough and I was able to slam the brakes and pull to the side without getting in an accident. Other things started happening too, less severe but sinister given the context above. Somebody cut out a bunch of metal skull designs and tacked them to our wall and pushed them under the door at night. What the fuck? I still have no idea what that was supposed to accomplish. Furniture was stolen off the porch. My boots vanished when I left them out there. And, oddly, several pounds of weed in a plastic sack appeared on our porch one morning. My mom called the manager to get it without going outside. For once in her life, the lady did something useful and actually fetched it and threw it in a dumpster. I've never felt so helpless in my life. What was I going to do? Call the police? It was around this time that a friend who lived abroad suggested that I come stay with him for a while for my own safety. I dropped out of school and left the country for 6 months. While my lawsuit worked its way through the courts, my mother and brother moved in with family, and then to another town, without submitting a forwarding address. Eventually, my tourist visa ran out and I had to come back home. I was a complete nervous wreck, and I ended up settling out of court for a relatively small sum of money just to make it be over with. My lawyer got a copy of the search warrant they used. It was riddled with grammar errors and switched between my apartment number 18 and the unit down the street, 25, for no reason, completely random. The suspect was someone with an entirely different name, who looked entirely different from any of us, who apparently sold some Oxycontin pills. She lived in Unit 25. I saw a copy of her driver's license, and it said right on the front of it, in nice clear letters, Unit 25, as her address. I don't know, I have no proof, but it was obvious that someone had been tipping off our drug dealers downstairs, and I wonder if the wrong number on the warrant was not a mistake at all. Perhaps it was meant to be retaliation for getting their friends in trouble, or trying to at least. Anyways, I've now regained full use of my hand, which the doctor told me might never happen. I no longer have a heart attack at loud noises, and I only feel slightly uneasy when I see police uniforms, rather than having a full-on panic attack. It's 6 years later, and now I'm beginning to reclaim my life. I kicked to the PTSD, and I'm going back to finish school. I feel like I lost the best part of my life in my 20s due to these jerks, and I'm still bitter about it. I currently live with my friends in an informal situation. My real address is not on any documentation, and I get my mail in a P.O. box in another town. Depending on which document you're looking at, I supposedly live at 5 different places, scattered from one end of the country to the other. And I'm not going to change that until I move a lot further away from where this all happened. As far as I know, nobody involved ever faced any consequences. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you guys may have. I'm going to preface by saying this is an absolutely true story, but I doubt you'll have a hard time not believing this as something that could happen to any kid. When I was 13, this would have been the year 2000, I got into a bad habit of sneaking out after my mother went to sleep. One night, when I did this, a friend was sleeping over who snuck out with me. We both were in great shape, so we could pretty much get from one side of town to the other in about a half hour on foot. So this was probably like 11 p.m. We sneak through the window and start walking to a girl from school's house. We make it there easy peasy, no problem, and she comes out and greets us, but nothing really happens because the guy I was with was her ex. Really a waste of time and a dumb choice on my part, but I didn't want to sit around in my house all night because this guy didn't really play video games. He's more of a country boy / athletic type. Let me also say, this being almost 20 years ago, and a relatively small town in Oklahoma, there weren't really many people out and about past midnight, hardly ever. Plus, cops patrolled the town pretty regularly, so you had to be extra sneaky if you were out on foot, and the drug addicts pretty much just stayed indoors. Anyway, we started making our way back to my house, and once we get about halfway across the town, this red truck comes hauling ass down the road we were standing on. It caught my attention because of how erratic the driver was being. I'm just standing there staring at it like, what the fuck? My friend looks at me and he's like, did you see that? We both kept walking and this truck approached us and inside was one scary ass looking lady. I'm not saying this to be mean, I'm just telling the truth. She was so damn scary. She looked gigantic. Her hair was standing straight up and she looked super spun out on meth, which was a pretty common thing in the area. So, she slows down and just kinda stares at us, and we keep walking, and I turn my back to look around, and this crazy person just turned around and is driving right at us. I'm like, let's get the fuck out of here, and we start sprinting until we hit this ditch, with this truck literally just barreling down behind us. We decide to jump into the ditch and start hiding. Not so bad, right? I stick my head up and peek around, and she's driving down past the road to my house. So, now I am actually scared at that moment, because of her driving back down in that direction, indicating she was looking for us. So, I tell my friend we gotta get out of here, and we start crouching, running through the woods, like Arthur on Red Dead, and taking the long route to my house. I'm looking everywhere for the red truck, because I know she went down this road that goes to my house, but she isn't anywhere to be seen. We see the house and just book it till we get to the driveway. We climb back in through the window, and I kinda check to make sure we weren't caught, and then we just sit back down and breathe a breath of relief. Thank God, that was weird, I said, and peeked my head out the window for further reassurance that the red truck was gone. Wrong. As if some sort of horrible revelation sent to traumatize me for the rest of my life. There she was in the red truck, just cruising by my house, down the street we had just been on, not like 1 minute ago. Same truck, same person, same erratic driving. She's literally driving past my house, which was totally out of the way from where we first saw her. I'll never forget it as long as I live. She really followed us, and took off after us like she was trying to run us down. What could she possibly have wanted? This is a very disturbing memory for me. Last year, I went out of state for the first year of college to a school in Indiana. In the first week, I formed many friendships, and one of those was with this boy who would end up becoming my stalker. He was fairly normal at the start, and I genuinely enjoyed his company, as well as his roommates, and became super close, spending lots of time together. Soon, I developed friendships with other people, and he became a part of my friend group. About a month into knowing him, I started to get a feeling that he liked me a little more than a friend. I still acted normal around him because I didn't want to draw attention to it, because the feeling wasn't mutual, and I didn't want to ruin our friendship. One night, about 3 months into the school year, everything changed. That night, all of my friends came to my dorm room. At the time, it was a double I was occupying by myself. They drank before they went to a party. I told my friends that they could drink in my room, but I did not want to go outside because I was very upset by a hurricane that was hitting my town in Florida. All of my friends were supportive of this, except my soon-to-be stalker. Throughout the time, he was in my room, just making jokes about how dramatic I was being, and even when everyone else told him to stop, he just wouldn't let up. Finally, everyone is ready to leave and go to the party. My stalker is the last to exit the room. Before going, he tells me he cares about me, and if I change my mind and decide to go out, or if I need anything, then I should text him, which I found strange, given his previous behavior, but I figured he had good senses, and was attempting just to be a good friend. A couple hours after my friends leave, I get a text from another friend telling me to come help our one friend who is too drunk and is vomiting. So, I change and walk up to our building. Upon arriving, I find out she is now fine, and I put her into her bed. I go outside of their building and cry about what's happening at home, on the steps by myself. I got a text from my stalker asking if I had changed my mind. At that moment, I was sad and figured if I went out and drank, maybe I would feel a little better. I tell him where I am, and I ask if the group wants to meet up. He says that they will come, but arrives alone. He suggested that we hang out in my room, but I told him I wanted to see the group. He didn't seem to be too happy with this, but I called one of my other friends to see where they were, and we went into another dorm room building where they were drinking. The party was busted, so they had to leave. When we get inside, I have a hard time figuring out which floor they are on and what room they are in. My stalker is visibly drunk at this point, and he pushes me into one of the connecting suits that are vacant. He begins to make fun of me again for being upset, and is becoming very touchy. I push him off and tell him to stop. We finally find one of our friends, and that friend tells us that we can meet him in the room, and he has alcohol there. My stalker suggests that we go to his room instead, because he's in a fight with one of the other guys and doesn't want to see him. I believe this, and I agree. When we get to his room, we are greeted by his roommate and a bunch of his roommate's friends. My stalker grabs my backpack with his alcohol and says we should just go to my room and our friend group can meet up with us. So we do. My dorm had 2 beds in it, and my stalker sits down on the one I sleep on, so I decided to sit down on the other one. He puts on a movie, and everything is going normal at first. I immediately began texting my one friend, whose room everyone was in, and tell him to bring our friends over to my room. My friends were all drunk at this point, and everyone I texted wasn't making sense. My stalker then gets in the same bed as me and lays beside me. I immediately feel uncomfortable and start rapidly texting my friends and tell them that blank is acting strange and they need to get here now. He sees I'm on my phone a lot, so my stalker grabs my phone from me and tells me I need a 10-minute break from it. During this time, he becomes very touchy and he suggests that we try this trick with my jewel, where he exhales it into my mouth, to which I reject too immediately. I tell him that it has been 10 minutes and that he needs to give me my phone back, but he denies knowing what I'm talking about. I stand up and move to the other bed because I feel uncomfortable, and he gets up and moves as well. I sit on the very end of the bed, opposite of him, and demand my phone. He continues to play dumb. Instead, he moves closer to me and tries to playfully touch me. I've had enough at this point, and I tell him he needs to give me my phone right now, and that it's not funny anymore. He tells me he needs to go to the bathroom first. While he's in the bathroom, I grab my laptop and I iMessage all of my friends to come to my room ASAP and tell them that he's being very creepy and I need their help. Once he returns, he tells me right away that he wants to level with me and that he thinks we should hook up. I had been making it very clear the entire time that I did not want that, and thought he would be able to read my body language and the situation and realize I was clearly uncomfortable. I tell him no and that I just want to be his friend and not ruin the friendship. He doesn't listen. He comes over and starts playfully grabbing me, and when I push him off, I tell him to stop. He then pushes me down onto the bed and tries to get over me. He grabs my legs and pulls me into him. I was thankfully sober and was able to kick away from him and get up and run into the hallway. He doesn't leave my room and begins to insult me and tell me he never wanted to be my friend but only wanted to sleep with me, and that guys and girls can never be friends. It always has to lead to something more. He then says he would never date me and that I'm too emotionally unstable for him, and a slew of other insults. One thing he said that especially scares me is that he was raised to take what he wants, no matter what, when defending his actions. I don't know what to do and just start crying and yelling at him to leave my room. He refuses and then makes fun of me for crying. At this point, he still has my phone and won't give it back or leave. I threaten to call the campus police on him if he doesn't leave, and he finally agrees. After that night, he texted me every day for a week trying to talk to me, and one of my friends told me to listen to what he had to say, so I did. He ended up confessing his love for me and told me that he thinks we cannot just be friends, even after I said multiple times that all I ever said I wanted was just to be a friend. I told him I think we need to stop talking. All of my other friends knew what happened and dropped him as well after that. He spent months trying to talk to me. He became completely obsessed. I would still hang out with his roommates, but I would only go into their room if he wasn't there. Only on a few occasions where he would come in, he would later text me paragraphs about how I was immature for ignoring him. Finally, I said we could try to be civil and just be acquaintances, just to be nice, but that then led him into getting very mad for acting uncomfortable around him and never wanting to hang out with him. At this point, every time I see him, he would blow up my phone and text me non-stop about me being fake towards him and that I needed to get over myself. Finally, I just decided to block him. After doing this, he got very angry. He would show up wherever I was all of the time and just stare at me. His roommates would tell me that he talked about me every night, basically for the rest of the school year. He would try to ask them things about what I was doing and who I was hooking up with. He would go up to my close girlfriends all the time and ask them what he could do to fix things with me. He tried to fight a guy who expressed that he was interested in me. A few months after the incident, he made up excuses to come to my door. He lived on the same floor as me. Almost every other day he came over. He started trying to talk to me in the hallways. He would offer me things and even bought me a Christmas present. The last 2 months of school, he told his roommate that his goal was to sleep with me before graduation, and he thinks I want him, and I'm just playing games with him. I in no way want him, or make it seem this way. The only way I act towards him is completely disgusted. Even over the summer, he has been texting his roommates about me. All of my friends tell me that he is stalking me, and recognize the way I am acting is in no way asking for his attention. I go back to school in the middle of August, and he will be there. He will be living in a frat next year, so I don't have to worry about him being on my floor, but he still worries me. I think something is very wrong with him emotionally or mentally, and not because of just the way he acted towards me, but just in general. I don't want anything to happen to myself or anyone else, and I think I should do something about it. Looking back on that night, I would say his behavior and things he said were very rapey, and that people who think if I want something I should take it no matter what are at a higher risk to sexually assault someone.